am going to hand you all over to Kim Schlesinger. She'll be talking about Nginx this month. I've worked with Kim for 3 years at Galvanize as a co-instructor, but I also know that Kim has been doing a lot of, SRE work with Fairwinds, and is just an awesome developer of her own right. So with that, Kim, I'll hand it off to you.
Cool, thanks, Brooks. Can you see my screen? Awesome. Great. Well, this talk is called Nginx and Node.js, and welcome to the Denver Node.js meetup. In this talk, I'm going to show you lots of ways you can set up Nginx to work with Node.js apps. And like the actual end goal of all of this is that Nginx can make your production Node.js apps faster. So, hi, I'm Kim Schlesinger. I'm currently a site reliability engineer at a company called Fairwinds. We are a Kubernetes enablement company. We work with clients to help them build, set up their Kubernetes clusters and migrate their apps from wherever they are deployed now into Kubernetes. We also have a software team that is developing tools to help people scan Kubernetes clusters to find security issues or ways to optimize their applications or infrastructure to save money. And a lot of my days, I'm doing Kubernetes administration stuff. I'm helping clients debug application problems in clusters, and do a lot of cloud infrastructure work. Prior to being an SRE at Fairwinds, I was an instructor at Galvanize in the web development program, where I did a lot of Node.js work and thought a lot about JavaScript. Since I left then, I haven't done very much Node.js application development, but you'll see my very simple Node.js apps in just a minute. So where I'm coming from for this talk, I interact with Nginx a little bit at my job, but I've seen how popular and how prevalent it is in the technology ecosystem. And so I told Brooks I wanted to give this talk so I would have a deadline, and then I would do lots of research and learn a lot about Nginx. And I've definitely learned a lot, but I am by no means an expert. So I hope you'll go on this journey with me. I'll show you some of the basics of Nginx, and hopefully you'll get to learn some things that I learned. So the agenda for the talk this evening, the first thing we'll do is I'll just tell you about Nginx. What is it? Who developed it? Why was it developed? Then I'm going to talk about how I set up my demos. I'm going to be demonstrating how to deploy Node.js apps and then how to put an Nginx web server in front of them. So I'll discuss the technologies I use for that. Then we'll get into the demos. So I'm going to show you how to use Nginx as a reverse proxy, as a web cache, and a load balancer. And we'll talk about what all of those terms mean. And then finally, at the end, we'll do a recap. And my goal is at the end of each section on the agenda, I'll pause and see if you have questions, so that you don't have to wait until the very end to ask your questions. So let's get into it about Nginx. So tonight during the talk, I'm going to be using the term server a lot. Server can sometimes be hard to define or can mean a lot of different things. And what I mean is a web server. And so that's some piece of technology or computer that sends files from itself to your web browser so that your browser can render those files and give you a very cool website. So Nginx, this is the logo. If you're not familiar, it may look new, it may not, but that's the Nginx logo. And the technology is called Nginx. It's spelled Nginx, and it's pronounced Nginx. And that took me several months before I knew what that meant. Nginx was designed to be a web server, a reverse proxy, and a load balancer. And like I said, we'll talk more about those things in a bit. It was first developed in 2004 by Igor Sisoev, and in the late 90s and early 2000s, people were on the internet more, and there were more websites, and people were excited, and web servers were having a hard time handling lots of requests that were coming in all at once. So The problem that Nginx was designed to solve is called the C10K problem. And that means concurrently handling 10,000 connections. So that was the problem to be solved at hand in the early aughts. Since then, the internet has grown tremendously, and the problem is a much bigger number at scale. But Nginx was originally designed to handle lots and lots of web request traffic. Also, Nginx is written in C. There are two options for Nginx that are available to you. One is Nginx open source. That's the free one. It's the one where you can see all the code and you can actually contribute to the code base if you're interested. There's also Nginx Plus, which is paid version of Nginx. It has more features than Nginx open source. So large enterprise companies sometimes are interested in paying for Nginx Plus. Nginx is incredibly prevalent on the web. According to the Netcraft April 2020 web server survey, Nginx is the web server that for 28.5 active websites on the web. So it was the #1 web server. Number 2 was Apache with 27.8% of active websites, which is also quite a bit, but Nginx and Apache are like always competing in that survey. So you might be wondering, how do you know which web server is serving my content? And I'd like to show you how to figure that out. So here I am, I'm at an Nginx webpage, and I'm going to open up my developer tools, and I'm already at the network tab. That's where I want to go. Now I'm going to hit reload or do a Control-R. And these are all of the files that the web servers are sending to my browser and that my browser is rendering. So I'm going to pick one that I think is actually from Nginx. So it's this page right here. And once you've got that open, you find response headers. And what you're looking for is this server heading. And so in some response headers, there is the name of the server that's serving the content. You can go to some websites and you won't see it, and that's okay. It can be a bit of a security issue. You don't always want to say this is the kind of server that I'm using, but if you're curious, that's how you find it. Also, tonight during the demo, in order to quote unquote prove that I have changed from Node.js serving the files to Nginx, this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to say before there was no Nginx, and now Nginx is the server. So this server is Cloudflare Nginx. This is the steps that I talked through. And then here's another example of what it looks like, Nginx there. All right, so that is about Nginx. I'm gonna stop sharing, and what questions do you have either about my background or Nginx or looking at what server is serving up your files?
Just out of curiosity, when Node is a server, how equivalent is a 10 or C10K measurement?
That's a good question. I don't have a very specific answer, but the more general answer is Node.js was also designed to handle a lot of requests. And so Node is pretty good at that. So Node.js and Nginx can be a good team in handling lots of different requests. There are some technical details about how they do it differently that I don't quite understand about threading and things like that.
So kind of building off that question, do you know how many requests Nginx can handle now?
That's a good question. I don't know. Will you look it up during the next section? Cool. All right, what other questions?
I'm glad you didn't do that to me.
You are also welcome to do that, but I won't call on you. Cool.
One question for you, Kim. Do you know if it's possible to override that server header that's sent? Like, can I somehow change that and pretend to be a different server?
I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, I will look that up when we're done. That's a great question. I do know that sometimes that header is not in the response, and you just can't tell what the server is. So I assume you can either have it or not. Cool.
So I guess that would be a setting in Nginx that you could set. Don't set that setting.
I think so. All right, let's see. What does Bob say? Bob says, generally, properly configured Nginx can handle up to 400,000 to 500,000 requests per second. Wow. Excellent. All right, so it handles a lot more requests now than it did in 2004 when it first came out, which makes a lot of sense. All right, let's head back to the presentation. So we've talked about what is Nginx. And now I want to just give you some information before we start. So I'm going to do a lot of demonstrating, and these are the tools that I'm using. So I'm going to be SSHing onto a remote server. I set up that server using a DigitalOcean droplet, and the operating system that it's running is Ubuntu 18.04.3. You're also going to see me use iterm2 profiles. So you'll see it in a bit, but it's really nifty. And as the first time I saw it, I asked the person to tell me what it was. So we'll see that in a bit when I'm in my terminal. I also will be using Dockerized Node.js apps. They're very simple Node apps that I built, and then I Dockerized them. And the code for all of that is in this GitHub repository. It's my GitHub username, and it's Nginx Node.js. I put a link in the chat, and you're welcome to follow along now. So those are the things that I'm using for my demo. Today I was thinking about what did I need to know and be able to do before I could even like the base level for where I'm going to hop off. And so these are the things that I know and I'm able to do so I could investigate Nginx. So the first one was I know how to set up a remote server. I used DigitalOcean this time because I've never used it before and I was really curious. I really like it and recommend it. You can set up remote servers with Amazon EC2. You can use Google Cloud Service, Linode. There's probably lots more places that you can set up remote servers. So that's one thing I'm able to do. Another thing is I'm able to use SSH to connect to those servers. So when I open up the iterm2 profiles, an SSH command is going to run, and then that makes my terminal the shell of that remote computer. I know how to build an app with Node.js and Express. The two apps are built with those technologies. I also know how to containerize Node.js apps with Docker, which is a big thing. And then I also know how to deploy apps using Docker. So there's a ton of prerequisites that I have before I could hop into this. And if you're new to this or you've just graduated, no problem. I'm going to hopefully write a blog post and point you to some places where you can learn these things. But this is what I am able to do before I was able to hop into exploring Nginx. And then the last thing, so prior to my current job, I was a web developer and I wrote a lot of code and I wrote a lot of JavaScript code and I made a lot of stuff with Node.js, and I felt very productive and creative, and usually at the end of the day, I would push something up to GitHub and it would be code that I wrote, and it felt like a thing that I made. And in my current job, I don't write that much code, but I do a ton of configuration management. And so what that looks like in my day-to-day is I open files, I find like one value that needs to be changed or needs to be added, and I change that. And it's a very different feeling for me because I'm not writing code. What I'm doing is I'm like setting things and then leveraging code underneath that somebody else has written. I don't have anything super profound to say about this, but if you are still exploring careers in the technology industry and you don't love programming, you don't love writing code all the time, and you see some of the configuration management stuff we do with Nginx tonight, I would say look into the ops side of things, look into DevOps, but it's just something to consider, sort of like this different paradigm of interacting with technology. So that is my thought there. All right, what questions do you have? Uh-oh. I made my Zoom window very small. Okay, now it's back. All right.
A lot of the places I've worked, somebody either likes programming or they like DevOps. But it seems at the last place I worked, there was a push to get everybody into DevOps, but only partially. Are you kind of happy where you are? Do you miss coding? Are you happy, or, you know, do you think you go back and forth, or are you kind of like AB, where, you know, you'd probably say, yes, DevOps is where I want to be?
That's an interesting question. I do write a little bit of code at my job. We have internal tools that are written in Python and Go that all employees sort of contribute to, and I like writing code for fun. So my goal, I think I'm just naturally better at the configuration management part. I think I have a better skill set for thinking in distributed systems than I do for programming. But I don't want to like lose track of programming. So I think it's possible to either do one or the other, or find a role where you sort of get the ratios that you want.
I didn't express it well, but do you think that there's types that like this or that, or do you think it's just, you know, random?
I mean, I think it depends on the work, you know. I used to be a teacher, and I've been really interested in sociology like a lot of my life, which is a lot of systems thinking actually. And that sort of thinking actually applies really well to cloud infrastructure stuff. So I don't know, there's some surprising overlaps like that. And that's, I'm glad you're asking that though, because I think in pondering programming versus configuration management, like I do want you to like think about like, what does that mean? And who does that and why is that? And so I appreciate that, Jim. All right, let's hop back into it. All right, we're finally at the thing, which is next I'm going to show you how to use Nginx as a reverse proxy. So what is a reverse proxy? According to Mozilla Developer Network, a reverse proxy takes requests from the internet and forwards them to servers in an internal network. And so if you look at this diagram, there's a cube that says client. And so that's users, people on laptops, people on phones, and they go to a website that they want, and that goes over the internet. And then that HTTP request hits a proxy server. And then the proxy server says, I'm going to send it to this other server that's inside an internal network. Reverse proxies are in contrast to forward proxies, which is just when a server takes a request and sends it out on the regular internet. It's not an internal network. All right, so reverse proxy demo. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm opening up my reverse proxy tab or my profile in iterm2. And it's running an SSH command, which is going to get me to my DigitalOcean droplet, which is called Reverse Proxy. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just show you my demo app. And I'm going to grab the commands for it on my GitHub repo. All right, so what I want to do is I want to use Docker to deploy and expose the 8080 port for this very simple Node.js server. And so the instructions here, it says SSH onto your Ubuntu server. I'm there. And then it says use this package management tool, apt, to update and then install Docker. I believe I have Docker installed on this already. Yep, so I just ran the Docker command and like it says a bunch of Docker stuff, which means Docker is there. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this Docker image that I built. All right, it looks like it's up to date. And then I'm going to run this Docker run command. And it says that this app is running on the port 8080. And so now what I'm going to do is I've got the IP address of this server. I'm going to pop it in here and I'm going to say, hey, take me to port 8080. All right, this is my very simple Node.js app. It's a JSON payload and there's a message that says, hello, Denver Node.js. And then it says this node server was started at this time, UTC time. So if we open up DevTools and go to the network reload and then look, so here's the response header. There is no server information here, but it does say that this is powered by Express. So I'm assuming it's a Node.js server, which, well, I know it is. So cool. So right now, from my browser, I'm making this request to this remote server on port 8080, and it's going right to the Node.js app, and the Node.js app is sending the response back. And what I want to do is I want to put Nginx in front of that so that Nginx intercepts the request, it sends the request to the Node.js app. Node.js app sends the response back, and then Nginx sends it back to me. So let's do that. Let's see. All right, so I'm back at my remote server. I'm going to open another tab of the Reverse Proxy server, and I'm going to pull up the commands that I need. Beautiful. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install Nginx. I'm going to use this apt command, installing Nginx core. It says, do you want to install this? And I say yes. And it's installing all that software. Rad. I'm going to clear that out. Next thing I'm going to do, and this is something that's true of Nginx. So when you install Nginx on a server, it creates a bunch of directories and files on that server, and it will give you a default configuration file. And so I want to go to that default configuration file. For this version of Nginx, that file lives in the root directory at the etc Nginx sites available directory, and the configuration file is called default. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open that with Vim. This file has always been the scariest thing to me about Nginx because they give you everything, every like possible configuration that you can set up, and then they give you a bunch of notes at the top. I realize it's hard to see because of the colors. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete all of this. So let's see. I've been practicing my Vim, Kyle. So I deleted all of that, and I'm going to paste in what I believe is the simplest like block of Nginx config that you can get. So if I go to my Nginx config files and I go to simple reverse proxy, I have this block and it says server, and then it says location, and then it says proxy pass. And so what it's saying is, when I initialize Nginx, it's going to create a server, and it's going to be listening on the root, so the /. And whenever a user makes a request at the root, it's going to pass it to the address of my Node.js server. So let me copy this and paste it in here. I'll get rid of that extra line on top, and I will save that. Okay, so I have Nginx installed. I made a change to the Nginx configuration, but now I need to restart Nginx. And so the way that I'm going to do that is with this command, service Nginx reload. So service Nginx reload. Uh-oh. All right, so I did something wrong. I'm going to run this command and see if
the IP address wasn't replaced.
Oh, perfect, thank you. All right, so I'll go back and get that Vim file. And I've got that IP address. Actually, it's in my browser. Grab that, come back here, make sure I don't have 2 colons. Okay, and then close out of that. Okay, so now I'm going to run that service Nginx reload. No errors, thank you, Jim. And then if I go back to the browser, and if I take off the port, you can see I'm just going to that IP address. There's no port specified, and I'm getting that message, that JSON payload. And then if I go to the inspector tools and I look for that file, hey, all right. So Nginx is acting as a reverse proxy. It's accepting the request, it's grabbing the files, and then it's sending them back to me, and that's being specified here in the response headers. So let's go back to this. So I showed you what I think is the simplest possible configuration. You got a little glimpse of the default configuration that's sort of like everything and the kitchen sink. I'm not going to show this now, but I have this in the GitHub repo. This is another reverse proxy configuration, and it has a little bit more information so that you can pass request headers to your Node.js app and back. So to review what I did, I had my Node.js app running on my server, and then I opened another tab and I downloaded Nginx. I found and I edited that configuration file. Then I reloaded Nginx with that command, service Nginx reload, and then I checked with my dev tools to see if Nginx was the server. So that was Nginx as a reverse proxy. I want to know, what questions do you have? I would also like to hear 2 or 3 people say one thing that you learned. And it's okay if you unmute yourself and step on someone's toes, like that's fine with me. So what questions do you have, and or what's one thing you learned? It doesn't have to be Nginx specific. It can be like, oh, cool, I didn't know you could do that thing, or I didn't know that vim command or something like that.
A question, can you have 2 node instances at different IP addresses and conditionally forward one versus the other based on domains? And I know the answer is yes, but that's actually why I tuned in, is that's what I screwed up on once.
Yes, you can. I don't know specifically how to set up the configuration to like have conditionals in it, but at the end of the talk, I'm going to show you how to set up Nginx as a load balancer, and you can configure the load balancers with different algorithms.
Question not Nginx related. I was looking at the core Docker file, and I noticed you used like Arch, and you didn't really use a base image. You installed it from scratch. Is that just you being really cool, or why go so skinny for this? Is it just like a best practice thing that you practice at Fairwinds, perhaps?
No, we don't do a whole lot of Dockerizing. We don't do app development at Fairwinds. That is from the how to Dockerize a Node.js app tutorial. So I don't have a good reason. I just copied that.
Kim, there's a question in the chat.
All right, the question: can you reverse proxy by a subdomain or path? Sorry, on Windows box, so no microcam. Yes, you can. I would just Google that or like look through the Nginx docs to get the specific ways to configure that. But yeah, you can like set up the proxy to do all sorts of things. Say like, well, this, if the request comes in on root, go here. If this happens, go here. If this happens, go here. All right, I got some questions. I want to hear 2 things people learned or 2 aha moments.
I think something I learned is that how simple Nginx config was. What I've always done in the past is just take the default and then just like gingerly make one tiny change, restart it, and then see whether or not it broke. And if it broke, undo it. And I always would have like a copy, like nginx.backup, just in case. But yeah, that's actually really awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I spent a few weeks prepping for this by doing that, and I have like a bunch of like long config files where a lot of stuff is commented out. But yes, it can be just a few lines. Thanks, Brooks.
Yep, I actually had the same takeaway. That was like every Nginx config I've seen has been a mile long, and I guess I didn't realize it didn't have to be.
Yeah, I kept asking myself, like, what's the simplest config I could make work? And luckily those work. Cool. Any other one thing you learned? There's another question in the chat. Any experience in Zool proxy versus Nginx, pros and cons? I don't have any experience with that, so I can't speak to it. All right,
It's just my first exposure to Nginx, so thanks for like doing that. And I think like in the very beginning where you told us how to pronounce it, like I had questions when I signed up for it. So
that's legit. My friend Dan Levy, who I used to work with, I remember when he started working with us at Galvanize, he had an Nginx sticker on his computer, and like one day I was in a room alone with him and I was like, hey, how do you say that thing? Like, what is that thing? How do you say it? What is it? Cool. All right, let's head back. So we've talked about and seen how to use Nginx as a reverse proxy. Now I'm going to show you how to use Nginx as a web cache. And so let's just talk about what a web cache is. And so what I'm going to show you how to do is how to serve static content. And so these are some things that you'll never change, or you'll change very infrequently. So some things you might want to serve statically are HTML files, are JavaScript files that don't do much changing, CSS files. Maybe you have images that take a long time to load and you want to save those in your web cache instead. What I'm going to show you is an app that has this index.html, and I'll show you what the index.html actually looks like in a bit. But we're going to use this Nginx config to serve up a static HTML file. So let me get my head back on straight. So I'm going to close this out, and I don't need this anymore. So I'm going to open up a web cache tab. I'm going to open up a second one. And so I have a different Node.js app for this demonstration. So let me get that all loaded up for you. So this is called the example website. I believe I have Docker installed, but let me check. Yep. And I'm going to pull in the most recent image of this. Cool. And then this application gets exposed on port 3000. Ruh-roh. I wonder, oh, it's maybe already running. So let me go get the IP address for this server and see if there's already something running on port 3000. Oh yeah, there we go. All right, so this is my very simple website. So at the root is an index.html page, nothing special. But if you do a / and you put anything else, I just have a wildcard route that's going to send you this message. Imagine all sorts of cool custom views here. And so just to prove it out, like 65 does the same thing. Yeah. Oh, well, that was wrong because I didn't have the /. That's okay. So what I was thinking about when I built this little demo app was at a company, like what's a use case for when you could serve up something statically versus when you want the traffic to go to Nginx and do things dynamically. And so I was thinking, well, if you have like a landing page that all users are going to see, like that's fairly straightforward, and you probably don't need to have that in your Node.js app. So Nginx could serve that up. But if you had like routes that pull data from a database and things are customized for the user, that you probably do want to be processed in Nginx. And so that's why I set this app up in the way that I did. So just to prove that this isn't being served by Nginx yet, looking at the response headers, we have that X powered by header. It says Express, but there's no Nginx server. And when we see that JSON, same thing, no Nginx. And then the one other thing I wanted to show you, I meant to do this. So if I go to port 3000, I get my app, but if I just go to the root, there's nothing there. Like I haven't configured things to look there. So let's make this sort of a web cache. So let me grab my web cache configuration. All right, so to dissect this a little bit, I want to go here first. So the location block says when you hit the root, you're going to go to that server at this port. So that's the thing that we did. So this is actually a reverse proxy. This does some other stuff. And then the next thing is that the actual Nginx server, whenever someone is requesting any page that ends with .html, and this is some regular expression, then you're actually going to go to this file, this directory on the server, and you're going to pull the HTML files from there instead of from the Nginx app. So I need to set that up. So I'm going to do the configuration first. Well, let me get all the spaces. All right, so I'll clear that out. So I'm going vim, and I'm going back to that location where the default configuration happens. So go to the root, etc Nginx, and then I believe it's called sites available. Ooh, I might not have Nginx on here. Let's see. Nope, don't have Nginx yet. So let me install Nginx. Yes, this is just a different server, so I don't have that installed there. Okay, so now let me try vim etc Nginx. Okay, sites available. I know it's there now because it's auto completing. Available and then default. All right, there's that default. So let's see, get rid of that. And then, oops, I gotta go grab it again. Oh, that didn't work. All right, let me grab this from raw. I'm not sure that's going to work. I'll give it a try. I'm worried like my indentation is off. So if I do service.
Don't forget to change the IP address.
Oh yeah, thank you. All right, let me change the IP address and then we'll run that again. All right. And oh, dang it. I don't think I gave you the be kind to me in my live coding in my introductory spiel, but there we go. Okay, so, okay, that looks like it worked. There's one thing though that I need to do, and I need to put that index.html file in this directory. So I need, it's root var www static files. So if I change into the root, change into the root directory, and I'm going to change into var, and then I bet there's www. Cool. Oh, maybe I already did this in here. Nope. Okay, so I want a directory called static files. And then in that directory, I'm going to create that index.html file. And then I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to copy that HTML. Let's see, where did I put it? I put it in my, can I copy that? No, okay. Well, it also lives in here. Copy and paste. All right, looks good. Cool. So I'm going to change back to my home directory. I'm going to clear that out. And so originally, when we just went to the IP address, there was nothing there. Hey, okay, now there's something there. So that reverse proxy is working. And before, there was no Nginx. And I believe it is Nginx now. Yep, this Ubuntu. And then if we go to the data, that's also getting served by that. So this is the this is the part of the demo where I'm not sure it actually worked. I assume that Nginx is serving up that file from that directory that I created, but I'm not actually sure how to figure that out. So I think it worked, but consider this the most questionable part of the demo. But let's take a look back at, okay, so we added that Nginx configuration, and that was Nginx as a web cache, sort of asterisk. It's a reverse proxy that's like serving up some files. But I guess the thing I would point out is you can do a lot with these location directives. And so in like the configuration that comes with Nginx, I believe they, oh yeah, so that this line here, it's saying like, if you're looking for anything in an images, JavaScript, JS, CSS, Flash Media, or static directory, like find that on the server, in the Nginx server.
Kim, you
So,
stopped sharing your screen. So.
Oh, darn. Well, let me show you that then. Thank you. So what I was hoping to show you was this block right here, this location directive is just saying, anytime there's a request from the images, JavaScript, JS, CSS, Flash Media, or static directory, then pull that file from this directory instead of from whatever else it might be. So I'll stop there. What questions do you have? Oh, that's a good idea. I could change the HTML to prove it's different, but I'm not going to do that because I have to like push the Docker image and pull it down. But what questions do you have? And 2 to 3 things that or 2 to 3 people to say something that you learned.
I'm not sure if I was clear on what the caching mechanism actually is for those static files with Nginx, because it's just going to the same folder.
Yeah, you could have.
That's not caching?
Yeah,
or are you talking about like an in-memory cache? It builds a memory of that particular folder and refreshes it every 30 days.
Yep, that's what it is. It's
Okay.
It's not a web cache like Varnish or Cloudflare, but it's like the seed of the idea.
Gotcha.
So Kim, you're doing an excellent job, and I'm really appreciating it. I have an instinct that you cached the HTML page, the file that Node would normally be serving, but that the request for the image is not being cached and is still going to the Node server and still serving from the Docker file essentially. Is that what you?
I think something like that's happening.
But traditionally,
oh, go ahead.
Traditionally, you're trying to offload the static images to the Nginx server because it doesn't need to do anything to them. So Node wouldn't be needed for those, but it would still conceivably be needed for the HTML. So
yes,
I kind of expected it to be the opposite direction, but
that's fair.
I'm still learning a lot. So.
Yeah, that is my weakest demo for sure. But yeah.
No, thank you for stepping up. You know, it's awesome.
But yeah, that is like the idea that you can tell Nginx, I want you to hold these things like certain files, and I want you to serve those, and I want you to let other requests go through to the server and like bring them back. Is sort of the point I want to make. All right, I would like to hear at least 2 something you learned. It doesn't have to be about Nginx. It can be about anything you've seen or heard. And I'd love to hear from some people who haven't said anything yet tonight. All right, if you've said something, you are welcome to tell me something you learned. I also realize like people are engaged in different levels. Like some people might just have this on in the background and that's fine.
There's like a lot of steps to using Nginx before actually using them.
Yeah, there's a lot of steps. that's why I tried to make that list of prerequisite skills, just like, there's a lot of things, you have to do before getting to this point. I will say there are ways to set up Nginx on just like your computer and play around with it. And I decided not to go over that tonight. So that would eliminate some of the remote server setup, the SSH steps, things like that. But your app also wouldn't be able to be on the internet.
Do you guys use some kind of scripting tool like Puppeteer or any of the things to make sure that everything gets done repetitively and, blah, blah, blah?
I know about those tools. At the company that I work for, we use Nginx as an ingress into Kubernetes clusters, and it's a little bit different. So I was chatting with Brooks a couple of days ago about this talk and sort of asked him what he wanted to learn. And he has more experience with Nginx, but he was saying, like, how could you automate, like, when you get a new domain or a new server, like, how could you automate adding that to the Nginx configuration file? And I think that is a good question, and I don't know the answer. Cool, thank you, Joseph, for saying I didn't know about the caching aspect. Brooks, you said, I noticed in the configuration file there was a 30-day cache. Does that mean that any changes to the HTML file won't get shown until the cache is invalidated? I believe that's what that means. So, cool.
You know if there's another cache invalidation mechanism? Or would that be more like an advanced configuration? Because you would think maybe like a trigger on a data change or something.
Yeah, there probably is. I don't know. Based on the research I did for this talk. All right, let's head back to the last demonstration. All right, so we talked a little bit about that. We set up Nginx as a web cache, kind of, sorta. And the last demonstration is how to use Nginx as a load balancer. And so if that term is new to you or you've never had a chance to look into it, what a load balancer is it's like this diagram. So there's a user who makes a request that goes to the internet, and it hits the load balancer first, and then the load balancer decides where it's going to send the request to. And in general, with load balancing right now is you have just tons and tons of replicas of the exact same application. And the goal there is that you have high availability of this application, that the performance is high, that users get the requests that they're making. And so that's sort of the goal of load balancers, at least in cloud computing. The load balancer that I'm going to show you for demonstration purposes, it actually is load balancing against or across the two apps that we have tonight. And so there's the thing that's just the JSON payload, and then there's the app that has the HTML page. And you probably wouldn't do that in production at a company, but I thought it was a good demonstration of how it works. All right, we're going to first, I'm going to show you, actually it's the only one I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you a round robin load balancer. And so all that means is that the algorithm for load balancing is just, it's like I did one, and then when the next request comes in, I send it to server 2, and then when the next request comes in, I send it to server 3, and when I'm out of that, I just keep going round and round and round. And this is the Nginx configuration. This has those two apps, and so I'm going to use the same server that I was using, which is the web cache server, and I believe that I've already got 3,000 running. Let me get that, but let's double check. All right, so yeah, this is still doing it still is using the configuration that we set up before, but yes, that's showing up on 3,000. And I don't think the app that listens on port 8,000 is running. Yep, there's nothing there. So I need to set that up.
80.
Oh yeah, thank you. I don't think it's working on 8080 either, but let's double check. Perfect, nothing there yet. So we're gonna go back through those steps that we did at the beginning, which are in the README. So I need I'm gonna just use this tab So I want to, this is the Node.js server. So I'm going to pull that Docker image down. Great. And then I'm going to run that app and expose port 8080. And so, awesome. Now it's working. Cool. All right. So we have those two apps running on the server, port 8080 and port 3000, and we want to set up a load balancer that's going to just flip off between them, depending on how many requests are coming in. So let's go to the Nginx config files. Let's do the load balancer configuration. And I will copy that. And okay. So this is, that's them. Let's see, sites available, default. All right, so there's our web cache config. Let's delete that and paste this in. And just to look at what we're doing. So we've got that server block again, and we have that location directive, and it's saying the thing that you're going to proxy to is node apps. And the way that you define that is in this block, the upstream block, you give it a name, and then you say, these are the servers that I want you to send that traffic to. And I'm glad I went through this here, because I need to put those IP addresses in. So the IP address is that. And same IP address, different port. We're gonna write that. We'll see. So we'll do that service. Nginx, we'll do a restart. All right. So now if I just go to that IP address, I hope I see flipping back and forth. Hey, hey, between those apps. And so the load balancer is working. And this is on the internet. Oops, that's not what you want. I'll just drop this in the chat. You're welcome to like hit that yourself and see it for yourself. Let's see, where's the chat? Oh. So feel free to go check that out, and I'll go back to sharing my screen. So that's the load balancer. Like I mentioned, there are several different algorithms that come with Nginx, the open source, that you can make use of. And this is a nice part of configuration because this is a really simple thing to do. And so if you don't want to do round robin, where it's just going in order and then going in a circle, you can specify least connections as the algorithm, and you just drop in this least underscore con, and then Nginx will figure out which of the servers has the fewest connections live right now, and it'll send traffic there. So that's pretty cool. Another one that you can configure is an IP hash load balancer. And so what that will do is it will look at the IP address of the request, and it'll hash it, and it will keep sending that IP address to the same server. So like if you're sharding a bunch of data in databases and you have data in all sorts of places and a specific user's data is in one of those shards, you can actually say like, nope, I want you to go to this specific shard or go to the specific database where that user's data is. So yeah, I'm gonna just do the recap and then we can talk about load balancers. But this is the end essentially. So I showed you all these things, but the end goal is that if you were to like take this back to your company, if they aren't already doing this, Nginx can make your production Node.js apps faster. You can either use Nginx, oh yeah, the Nginx configuration is the thing. You can set up Nginx to be a reverse proxy. You can set up Nginx to be a web cache, or you can set up Nginx to be a load balancer. And there is so much more that you can do with Nginx. So many things I haven't even looked at. So Nginx is a huge project. It's been around since 2004. It's incredibly prevalent and well used on the web. So if you have some need, Nginx can probably take care of it. So 2 articles that I recommend are the full example configuration page on the Nginx wiki. And if you are a Node.js developer, this article helped me structure my talk, but it's just 5 tips for improving the performance of your Node.js applications with Nginx. So let's see, I think I have, cool. That's it. I'm Kim. I would love to answer your questions, hear some of your takeaways, and then we'll be done. Brooke said, IP hashing would allow WebSockets to be working, right? I believe so. You can use that with WebSockets. Any comparison thoughts on Nginx versus AWS Elastic Load Balancer? The only thought I have is relatively general, which is they are different tools and serve different needs. I don't actually know like the detailed differences between the 2 of them, but all of these things like setting up reverse proxy, setting up load balancers, doing web caching, Nginx is one option, but there are many other options out there that allow you to achieve the same outcome. All right, I'm gonna, go ahead, Brooks.
For like best, I don't know if you know the answer to this, for best practices with Nginx, is it to put Nginx on the same server where your server is running like a Node.js, or would it be best to put it on another sort of droplet in front of your other Node.js servers?
That's a great question. It would be better to put it on another server so that it's separate and it's distributed and it's more of a microservice architecture as opposed to having like this monolith, this one server with all your stuff on it.
I was on a project where it was on AWS. They had a load balancer in front of single instances, and they didn't end up distributing the load anywhere. And I never could get an answer for why one would do that. Do you have an insight?
No, that's a great question. I work with a client who, when they came to us, they had the same setup. I mean, maybe if the load, there's some aspect of the load balancer that like makes the performance better. But it does, it seems like an anti-pattern to me to say one load balancer per server or instance, whereas load balancers are designed to like, distribute traffic across them. All right, I want everyone to think about one thing you learned or one thing you saw that you never knew about before. And I'm going to call on a couple people. You are absolutely allowed to say I'm like pass or just not say anything. But I'm curious, Alice, could you tell me one thing you learned this evening?
It was a lot. I feel like it was just exposure for me to see like practically how you're setting up like your load balancers and your reverse proxies and just sort of like looking at the implementation details. I have yet to work more practically with these sorts of things. So for me, it was just like exposure to the language and like looking at how things are being done.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Kyle, what's one thing you learned?
I just realized that like my wrong camera was on. I'd like plugged back into my dock and I was like, well, that's fair. I think the big thing for me was that serving static files is such an obvious use case for doing something like this. Because that's like such a cumbersome thing to do in Node and such like a duh shit fast thing to do on Nginx. And this is like a really cool way to combine them.
Yeah, I think in my learning process, the time where I was like, oh my gosh, was watching regular expressions be used on the location directive, where you can say like, grab any file, from this directory, or grab any file with a JS extension or CSS extension. And yeah, that was a big revelation for me. Cool. Well, I hope you learned something. Thank you for coming and attending. I have that GitHub repo that you're welcome to look at. I believe there's a link to the Docker hub where the images are hosted, but if you are new to Node.js, those are extremely bare bones Node and Express apps, so those are good to look at. If you're curious about Docker, the Docker file is in there. Yeah, I appreciate you all for coming. Thank you. And I'll hand it back to Brooks.
Thank you very much, Kim. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we've really like super figured out the clapping over Zoom thing, but yeah. Thank you so much, Kim. That was really super informative. I learned a lot. I hope that everyone else did as well. I will have the video of this. I'll edit it down and throw that up on YouTube, and I'll have a link in the meetup page, and then I'll also probably put it on my Twitter and on Denver Devs as well. And we do this meetup every month, so the third Thursday of every single month, we'll be back here again. Probably remote again because I don't see any let up on the fun times anytime soon. So with that, let's all have a great time and be safe out there.
Bye.